Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. John and I are talking about monster tactics in this series, and today we're going to be talking about kobolds. We are looking at how they form up together, how they attack the enemy, and how you can make them unique in your gameplay. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today, John and I, like I said, are going to be talking about kobolds and the specific tactics you want to use for them in the course of gameplay. But before we do, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button in order to help our channel grow. Now, anyone that has played with kobolds, which if you play D&D for any length of time, you've probably seen them because they are a popular early monster that you put typically in your low-level campaigns. They're frequently showing their faces. They're just these resourceful, cunning little creatures that have a number of different skill sets that I don't think we always capitalize on. John, where should we be starting with little dragon-like humanoids?
Well, for one, I don't like to think of them as dragon-like humanoids. I like to think of them as dog-like humanoids because I like the older edition version of the kobold better.
That's fair. That's fair.
But that's not true for most people who are playing in the newer editions. They are, like you said, dragon-like. They have winged versions, and I don't know of any winged dogs. One thing that I do want to talk about with kobolds is kobolds are not just a sub-in for goblins. They're not the same thing. And we'll do a video on goblins, so some of that distinction will be more clear. But kobolds are their own thing. Like you said, they're cunning, and I think that the most famous D&D representation of the kobold is Tucker's Kobolds, with the idea of them basically engaging in battle with higher level opponents, more dangerous opponents, and being able to hold their own. And that has to do with the way that they approach tactical combat with enemies. And you have to consider that kobolds by themselves have managed to survive in a world that is populated by bigger, deadlier creatures, and you have to consider how it is that they're able to do that. One of the versions of this is that they become somewhat subservient to the bigger, stronger creatures, but another version of that is that they're so cunning and so tactical that it is dangerous to try and actually hunt them down, particularly in their lair.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes they're not represented well. And I think that oftentimes GMs struggle to represent them well because in a lot of modern depictions of them, you just don't see them essentially in the way that you're describing them. I mean, even in the course of the new Baldur's Gate game, Baldur's Gate 3, we see your one interaction with kobolds having them be a bunch of drunk, creatures, spoiler alert, just kind of tossed around in a room that are pretty easy to dispatch of because they aren't using the cunning tactics that we know them to be capable of.
Right. So, getting into the tactics, let's talk about that. So the biggest thing with kobolds is that we've talked about they're physically weak. They're not going to be able to handle toe-to-toe combat very well, and so for a kobold, their biggest benefit is distance and time. So they keep their distance from the larger enemies, and they try to keep that distance because the more distance that they have, the longer it takes for the big enemy to reach them. So that's a lot of what they're going to do. They have the flying versions of the kobold, like I was talking about. So the ones that can fly only come down to be able to drop a rock on someone's head, and then they get distance. The kobolds that have ranged attacks, they keep their distance. They fire their bows, and then they back up. They're trying to kite you away. And then any of the melee-oriented kobolds are not particularly interested in getting in close toe-to-toe combat. They're there to maintain the line and keep their ranged allies safe. That's the deployment that they're going to be using anytime that they are forced to engage in an open combat type scenario, which is not their preferred way of engaging in combat. Their preferred way is from stealth, from anywhere where they cannot be targeted directly. Obscurement. Yeah, sorry, that's the word I was trying to find. From stealth and from obscurement.
Yeah, I oftentimes think of kobolds as using tactics where they're essentially fleeing and regrouping, or they're kind of hit and running. And yes. I oftentimes apply this back to like George Washington, winning the Revolutionary War. You shoot when you see the whites of their eyes, and then you run away again, and you reformate and find another opportunity to attack the enemy, to exploit their weakness. and to utilize their resources against them, or at least try to get to a point that they run out of resources and they can't continue to pursue you.
Yes.
Kobolds, like we're going to keep saying this, they're cunning creatures. They recognize their weakness. They recognize their inability to stand toe-to-toe with the enemy. And so they're going to continuously use tactics to be able to find a way to chip away at the enemy until they fall.
Right, and this is something that I think is really important to realize with the kobolds, is what you're talking about, is they engage in wars of attrition. They do not engage in open warfare. They do not have rank and file kobolds marching together in order to go and try and attack or meet the human knights in open warfare. That's not what they do. And realistically, even when I think that the first version of the kobold that was represented in a campaign setting was the sorry, for 5th edition, I don't know if I said that, was the Dragon Queen, the module that they initially came out with, where the kobolds were attacking the small development town or whatever, and the heroes come in and they're fighting kobolds. Well, the kobolds aren't going to stick around and fight to the death in that scenario. They're in there to raid and do whatever it is that they're going to do. And as soon as they have gotten some loot or killed some people or done whatever they want to do, at the first sign of a physically superior threat, they're going to flee. And they're going to go to safe ground. Like, they're going to go underground. They're going to go to a safe spot. They're not going to continue to engage in, like, melee combat 1-to-1, because that is the way that they die, and they're smart enough, they're cunning enough to know that that's poor tactics on their part.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to go back to a place that they know is well defended and they know how to defend, which is oftentimes going to be their lair.
Yes.
You hear about kobold lairs all the time. I very rarely see a kobold's lair actually set up to represent their ability to be defensive and play to their strengths. They're going to use traps. They're going to use snares. They're going to have secret hidey holes where they can hit you from a distance and move back out to go get a better location or a better elevation in order to hit you again. They're not going to just sit out there in the middle of a field and be like, "Come at me, bro."
Right.
It's not going to happen.
And they're small creatures. They're very petite. When it comes right down to it. So when you're talking about a goblin lair, it should be cramped and small.
Kobold lair, not goblin lair.
Sorry. Yeah, see, they're the same. When you're talking about a kobold lair, they should be small. This is something that they specifically made for their size. So anything above small size isn't going to be able to move well through it. In fact, there's a good chance that if you're a human-sized or medium-sized creature, you're going to be crawling on your hands and knees, or at least stooped double as you're trying to move through these cramped locations. And like you said, they're going to have arrow slits where they can pepper you with arrows the entire time. They're going to have oil or grease slicked on the floor so that as you're crawling through on your belly trying to get past the entrance, they're just going to light it on fire and you can't move fast enough to get out of the way. They're going to employ tactics that allow them to benefit from what others would consider to be their weaknesses.
And I want to also just highlight that they are communicative amongst one another, and they are going to make sure they're utilizing that to their benefit. You talked about this a little bit beforehand about how you're going to have maybe a couple in your front line, you're going to have your archers in the back line, they're going to be protecting their own, they're going to be moving back and kind of drawing you into a place that they can maybe ambush from, or use more of their numbers to their advantage, or maybe they have, again, that elevation or something to utilize. If they have numbers that fall, they may pull them back and get them out of the way so you don't see they're dead, in order to kind of have, again, that psychological advantage against the enemy. But they're going to use misdirection is what I'm getting at. They're going to be using misdirection. They're going to be trying to deceive the enemy, and they're going to constantly be talking to the other ones that are fighting alongside with them, and having an exit strategy if needed, if they know they're not going to win the fight. Right.
They're going to have established signals. This comes into their tactics, their strategy, the way that they approach combat. They benefit from pack tactics in 5th edition, which is why when they're forced to engage, they mob. They're not going to try and split up and try and target. Like, if you're fighting 10 of them, you're not going to end up with 1 or 2 on each of the allies. All 10 of them are going to swarm on one person and try and kill them, and then swarm on the next one and try and kill them. That is their strategy, because they recognize numbers are to their benefit. It doesn't help for them to split up. The more that they're split up, the weaker that they become. And when things start looking bad, the signals go off and they retreat. They go to ground, they go to their lair, and then if anybody wants to pursue them, they're going to be penalized for that. This is where the attrition comes in. You're having to use healing potions, healing spells. You have to use your potions of fire protection because everything is greased and on fire. You have to use spells that protect you from arrows because you're constantly getting peppered from a distance and you can't see where it's coming from. And the one moment where you think that you finally made it out and you found the trap door that leads into their lair, you open it up and a bunch of green slimes fall on your head. Like, this is the way that they engage in combat with people who are bigger than they are. And this is how they survive. And I think that employing these tactics in a way that is true to what the kobold is something that is going to create memorable encounters for most of your players, to the point where they're actually going to fear the idea of trying to engage with what is considered to be one of the weakest creatures in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, so when your barbarian goes crawling into that kobold hole, and moments later, in a rage, and moments later you hear him screaming and cursing, like whatever, don't follow.
Yeah,
he is in his grave. He'll find you another barbarian.
Yes, which is the exact point. Like, if they kill you while you're trying to pursue them in their lair, great. But at the same time, if you decide that you're going to retreat, that's equally as great, because they have just defeated you. That's all that they need to know. And I think that the last thing that I have to say really about kobolds in general is just that they adapt. And they learn from what it is that they've experienced. So if you try and get into their lair and you do certain things that allow you to bypass some of the traps or some of the things that they have in place to prevent you from getting in but end up retreating, they will fix those. And next time it's going to be harder, because they will have changed the way that they've put their lair together, so you can't get past their initial defenses as easily next time.
Well, I hope that this has given everyone a new approach to kobolds, because they now sound like the most dangerous creature you can ever face in D&D. But in all seriousness, I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video. I would love to hear some of your thoughts on how you've used kobolds in your own campaigns. What are some memorable experiences that you've had? What is something that maybe John and I didn't touch on that you wish that we would have? And I guess with that, we'll see you all next week. Have a good one.
Dungeon Brew.